Hello again. For this video I want to move into the 1960s once again. I'm going slightly out of my official period, but some of the 1960s films I find fit my formula. They're films from British filmmakers which are pretty obscure and largely forgotten, and I find them interesting because they evoke Britain in a lost period of the past, not that very far distant past, but it is the past nevertheless. So this week I want to talk about a very obscure film I came across called We Had a Smashing Time. Now it certainly is a very obscure film. I'm sure hardly anybody's ever heard of it, and I find it very interesting. It's not a very good film, I have to say this. It's actually one of the silliest films I've seen for quite a long time. It's thoroughly mediocre. It's got one or two amusing or interesting moments, but in general it's a pretty poor effort. But what's interesting about it, it was made in 1967, and what is really interesting, I think, about it is it's set in London, you know, swinging London, 1967, and it's an attempt to capture the atmosphere of the time, and particularly of London at that time. And it does it reasonably well, mainly because quite a lot of it's shot on location in the street in various parts of London, particularly around Camden Town, which happens to be close to the part of London that I grew up in and where I went to school, which I knew at that time when I was at school. And also it has some scenes in Carnaby Street in the West End which are also very evocative. What's interesting is the things that are still the same, but an awful lot of things that are so very, very different. And particularly the scenes around Camden Town. It's amazing when you see the street scenes of Camden Town in 1967. You realise, once again, I think I mentioned this in another video somewhere, just what a Victorian city London still was in the 1960s. And I'd forgotten, Camden Town was full of the most amazing old junk shops. There was a really good second-hand junk market in one of the streets there, which has been gone for years now. And it was full of old Victorian shops, Victorian buildings, and hardly anything had changed. And yet, in the middle of all this old Victorian, crumbling, sooty London, there was this explosion of energy and excitement and innovation, which was the swinging 60s. And at the time, it was all incredibly new and revolutionary and strange. And yet, the other interesting thing is that looking at it now, from 2014, a lot of the 60s stuff actually looks incredibly old-fashioned. There's one nice bit in one of the scenes, clips that I've included, where somebody puts some music on in a boutique, and they put it on an enormous clunky reel-to-reel tape recorder, which would have been absolutely the latest technology and most amazing equipment then, but looks really strange and quaint now. And the decors, the clothes, the sets and so on, although they're trying desperately to be ultra trendy of the time, they do now look like something from another age and almost from a kind of science fiction world. Anyway, the story of the film is fairly simple. It's about two lassies from up north who come down to London to make their fortune, and they're played by Rita Tushingham and Lynn Redgrave. Rita Tushingham became a really big star in the 60s, and she had a very characteristic, rather thin face, rather kind of a urchin-like face. She became a very big star. Lynn Redgrave is from the famous Redgrave acting family, and they are the two main characters. They come to London to make their fortune, as a lot of people did in the 1960s. You know, London was the place to be. And then, of course, you know, they immediately lose all their money and get into all kinds of scrapes and end up living in a really dingy flat with a lady who works as a quote, nightclub hostess, unquote. Anyway, one thing or another happens. In fact, they get involved in the whole kind of pop music and fashion thing, and Lynn Redgrave ends up becoming a pop star, a very, very transient pop star with this pretty awful song that she sings that becomes popular. And then Rita Tushingham sort of tags along as a sort of little dull, uninteresting one. But eventually the tables are turned and Rita Tushingham becomes a sort of fashionable fashion icon type. Lynn Redgrave rather kind of crashes. in the end. And in fact, but by the end of the film, I suppose it doesn't matter giving away the plot because it's pretty rubbish anyway. But they end up deciding London's a bit too much when they go back home up north. But in the meantime, they have a lot of adventures, and there's some kind of hilarious scenes amongst the awfulness of it. By the way, it's a kind of quasi-musical, and I have to say that the music part of it is terrible. The songs are really terrible. And the songs are, and the screenplay is by George Melly, who was another really big figure in the 60s. Well, he was a big figure from the 50s up to about the 90s. And the screenplay is okay, but the songs he wrote with John Addison, the composer, another well-known figure. John Addison wrote music for quite a few films, are frankly pretty dire. So from a musical point of view, it's almost complete failure. But as regards the acting, there are some nice little cameos. One of my favourites, which I've included in a clip here, is a cameo by the great Irene Handel. Now, Irene Handel is one of the classic British film actresses of that period, right from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And she almost always played landladies and similar kinds of middle-aged ladies. In this one, she's the proprietress of a second-hand clothes shop, and she's absolutely wonderful. She had this inimitable accent and manner, which was just classic of old-fashioned London landladies of that time. So there's a nice little scene where the Rita Tushingham character has to get some new, quote, trendy, unquote, clothes, which in fact are old second-hand clothes, because that was the fashion in those days. Wearing old was the new, or whatever they said in those days. Anyway, there's a nice scene where she gets some second-hand clothes from Irene Handel, and then there's another scene later where they Rita Tushingham gets a job in a boutique, and this is very typical of the time. Boutiques were all the rage. They were kind of really far out, as people said in those days, and kind of really cool and swinging and so on. And they were nearly always, they had kind of psychedelic decoration and strange names. This one is called Too Much, which is a very characteristic expression of that time. There was another famous one called I Was Kitchener's Valet, I think it was called, something like that. They all had kind of pretty wild names. And there's a nice little scene where this extremely posh upper middle class lady has decided to open a boutique, and it's all a bit of a joke. And then the last bit is from a wild party which takes place towards the end of the film in the post office tower. It's now called the Telecom Tower, which was the absolute latest modernistic science fiction type building in London in those days. There's a crazy party with all the famous people of the time. You know, you can see who they're meant to be roughly when they arrive, and it's a kind of what would have been known as a kind of really swinging rave up of the time. And it all ends in disaster, and there's an amazing scene where Rita Tushingham manages to turn the controls of the post office tower to full speed ahead, and the whole thing goes round and round in circles, and everybody's thrown all over the place, and it ends up more or less blowing up. And that's the kind of grand finale of the film. Anyway, as I said, it's a very silly film. Oh, I forgot to mention, it features a very young Michael York, another well-known British actor who became very big in the late 60s and after that, with a kind of very fashionable hairstyle and moustache at the time. He appears just briefly in the last clip. Anyway, as I said, it's not a very serious film. It's fairly mediocre. It's got some interesting actors and actresses and some amusing scenes in it, but as a whole, it's not a great film. But I wanted to include it because, above all, it captures something about the style and atmosphere of 1967. The way that everybody was desperately trying to be terribly, terribly modern and new, and yet somehow it was also still terribly old-fashioned and British. And now, looking back at it, it's difficult not to be nostalgic about it because it seems like another lost world. There you are, I just seem to be spending all my time looking for lost worlds. Anyway, here's 2 or 3 little clips from We Had a Smashing Time from 1967.
Look, here's a second-hand clothes shop. Tell you what, see what you can fix yourself up with just for £1.
But he found them clothes. They look dreadfully old-fashioned.
Oh, Brenda, you don't know anything, do you? It's dead pacey to wear second-hand clothes, you know, feather boas and all that. Besides, we can only spare £1 because we got to find somewhere to live. Hey, there might be something on this.
Well, I thought we were going to live in Carnaby Street.
Well, we're not. Hey, listen. Young lady in showbiz requires 2 others in same or similar to share flat. That's us. Is it? Yeah, well, it might be. Listen, if I'm not back by the time you've got your gear, come and find me at flat 4, 16 Grudge Street. Do you think you can find that okay? This is Grudge Street, Yvonne. This is Grudge Street, Yvonne. Well, you've just got to count to 16 then, haven't you? Ta-ra. Ta-ra.
No, dear, it's not your colour. Yes. If it's animal paws to hang about you on your scooter, the answer is definitely no. Come in here, them little mods, asking for animal paws. Then while your back's turned, a nice bit of skunk vanishes up their knickers.
I don't want animal paws. It's my clothes. I need some others now that my friend's famous. I've got £1.
£1? That isn't much. I could do something for you if you like to throw in what you got on. There's this. You can have this for 10 shillings. It's fabulous. You try it on, dear. Come on, Olive.
So when they requisitioned my house and put me in them buildings, I came to a decision.
Well, then, Tony, I think we'll take it.
Oh, don't tell me, darling. It's a dump. When I think what Mummy and Daddy sacrificed to give me a proper education, I could die of shame. Just dare.
Oh, I'm just the same. My mum, Mammy, she's always saying to me, just look at your room, Yvonne. Just look at it. You don't deserve to have such lovely things. Oh, the bathroom. Oh, no, it's the kitchen. Oh, well, quite convenient.
Yes, it is quite handy. You can soak away in the bath and get your boyfriend to make you a cup of tea.
Oh, well, what sort of showbiz are you in, then?
Showbiz? Oh, you mean the advert? Oh, well, I do anything, really. Legit, Market Valley, cabaret. But I'm resting at the moment. My agent goes mad, raving mad. Because I won't take just anything that comes along. But I tell her, you've only got your 10% to think about. I've got my career. Still, a girl's got to eat. So only temporary, I'm a nightclub hostess.
Oh, that sounds really switched on.
Money's not bad, I suppose.
Must be fabulous.
Look, you better have your name on the rent book. Then if I decide to leave, the landlord can't boot you out. What sort of job are you after, anyway? Or did I ask you that before?
Well, I might have to take something temporary until I can get something dreamy, you know, make it.
You're joking, of course.
About this nightclub you work in.
Oh, yeah, I can fix you up there. And your friend. Look, why don't you come along tonight?
Oh, yes, I will. But I'm not sure about our Brenda. Good.
I need a dress.
There's this nightie. I could let you have that. Hold, Gaylord, a moment for me, will you, love? Oh, good, Brennan. It's nothing but nicks. Look, I can throw this in.
I can't wear a night dress in the street.
Right, under the cape, dear, who's to notice? Look at the work on it. Blinded their souls. You won't get work like that these days. Besides, you asked me where that nightdress come from.
Where did that nightie come from?
Titled, yes, but better than titled. Yes.
Oh, well, in that case, I'll have it.
I'm feeling great in my new clothes. You must admit they're grand, though they're second-hand. I'm up to date in my new clothes. It's wonderful to have new clothes.
I say, I do love your accent. It's so tuned in.
Do I call you a ladyship too?
Of course not. I'm only an honourable anyway. I'm called Charlotte Brillig. Call me Charlotte.
My name's Brenda.
How super! I don't think I've ever met anyone called Brenda before.
Is this your boutique, Charlotte?
Yes. Isn't it heaven? And of course that blasted girl hasn't arrived yet.
Why is it called Too Much? Won't that put folk off if they think everything's so pricey?
Not if they're thinking rich enough. And it was meant to be a pun, too. You know, too much. Too much? It's an expression. Yes, you're quite right, of course. Hopelessly twee, another grave mistake. Hello? Can I speak to Catherine, please? Still asleep? Well, wake her up then. These bloody Spanish butlers. So dim. Catherine, look, it's too much. It's 10 o'clock and the shop's still locked. Well, I know. I was there. Yes, it was a ball. But that's not the point. That's not the point. Well, I think that might be a good idea, too. Yes, I suppose I'll be there. See you. Ciao. Look, do you think you could manage all by yourself? Catherine's given herself the sack and I've got to rush. I'll be back at lunchtime.
Will it be all right? I mean, you don't even know me.
That's what's so lovely. See you.
We're here. We're here.
Make an effort to say you love me. Try, girl, I'll come running. Time will come when the makeshifts lose them. Now it's time to move.